The alien ship descended silently through Earth's atmosphere, its sleek metallic surface glinting faintly in the sunlight. On board, 3 young cadets from the Zorvian Empire prepared for their first encounter with humanity. They had been chosen for this mission because of their sharp minds and unshakable discipline. But none of them, Zinara, Torkin, or Phalis, could have imagined what awaited them on this strange blue planet. Commander Vrelk stood at the front of the ship, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the group. "Your task is simple," he said. "Observe, learn, and report back. Humanity has intrigued our scholars for centuries, especially their approach to warfare. Do not underestimate them. They are fragile yet unpredictable." The ship landed softly on a military base in the United States. As the hatch opened, warm air rushed inside, carrying scents unfamiliar to the cadets. Outside, a line of humans stood waiting, dressed in uniforms that looked both practical and authoritative. Leading them was Major Daniel Hayes, a tall man with graying hair and an expression that seemed equal parts welcoming and cautious. "Welcome to Earth," Major Hayes said, his tone polite but measured. He gestured toward a woman standing beside him. "This is Captain Laura Bennett. She'll be your guide during your stay here." Captain Bennett stepped forward, offering a small smile. "We're honored to host you," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was warmth in her eyes that made the cadets feel less uneasy about being so far from home. As they followed the humans across the base, the cadets took in everything around them. The buildings were sturdy but plain, the grounds meticulously maintained. Soldiers moved with purpose, some jogging, others carrying equipment. It all seemed so ordinary. Yet beneath the surface, there was an energy, a sense of readiness, that intrigued the aliens. Major Hayes led them to a large open field where soldiers were undergoing training exercises. Some practiced hand-to-hand combat, while others ran obstacle courses under the watchful eyes of instructors. Zinara tilted her head slightly, observing how the humans pushed themselves despite their physical limitations. Their bodies weren't built for endurance like those of the Zorgians, yet they refused to give up easily. Torkin noticed something else, the way the soldiers interacted with one another. 2 of them, a man and a woman, laughed loudly between drills. The man, Corporal Jake Miller, teased the woman, Private Emily Dawson, about her form during push-ups. Despite his teasing, there was no malice in his words, and Dawson responded with a grin before tackling another set of reps. To Torkin, it was puzzling. How could beings who were preparing for war still find time for such frivolity? Phalis, meanwhile, found himself drawn to Captain Bennett. She walked beside them, answering their questions patiently. When Zinara asked why the soldiers worked so hard even when they weren't in actual danger, Bennett replied simply, "Because preparation saves lives." Phalis frowned. Preparation was logical, yes, but these humans seemed driven by something deeper, something emotional. By the end of the day, the cadets returned to their quarters feeling overwhelmed. Everything about humanity was contradictory. They were weak yet resilient, serious yet playful, disciplined yet ruled by feelings. For the first time, the cadets began to wonder if understanding humans would be harder than they thought. That night, as they lay in their bunks, Zinara stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in her mind. These creatures were unlike anything she'd ever encountered. And though she didn't fully understand them yet, one thing was clear: humanity was far more complex and fascinating than any textbook could describe. The next morning, the alien cadets were up early, eager to continue their observations. Captain Laura Bennett greeted them outside their quarters with a clipboard in hand. "Today," she said, "you'll get a closer look at basic training. It's one of the foundations of our military system." She led them back to the same field they had visited the day before, but this time, they weren't just spectators. They would be allowed to interact more closely with the soldiers. As they approached, Zinara noticed how different the atmosphere felt compared to the previous day. The soldiers moved with sharper focus, their movements synchronized as if they were part of a single organism. An instructor barked orders, and the group responded instantly, without hesitation. Zinera tilted her head, trying to understand what made these humans so obedient. Was it fear, respect, or something else entirely? Torkin wandered closer to where Corporal Jake Miller and Private Emily Dawson were practicing marksmanship. He watched as Dawson steadied her rifle, took a deep breath, and fired. The bullet hit the target near the center. Miller clapped her on the shoulder. "Not bad, rookie," he said with a grin. "But you're still not beating my record." Dawson rolled her eyes but smiled back. "Give me a week," she shot back. "I'll have your trophy hanging on my wall." Torkin found himself smiling faintly at their banter. Back on his home planet, relationships between warriors were purely professional, efficient, and emotionless. Here, however, humor and camaraderie seemed woven into every interaction. It confused him. Didn't such distractions make them less effective fighters? Yet, watching how quickly Dawson adjusted her stance for another shot, he couldn't deny that her confidence appeared stronger after Miller's encouragement. Phalis, meanwhile, shadowed Captain Bennett as she oversaw a team-building exercise. Soldiers were tasked with crossing a rope bridge suspended over a shallow pit filled with mud. One by one, they worked together, shouting advice and cheering each other on. When a young soldier slipped and fell into the mud below, his teammates erupted in laughter, not mocking, but supportive. Within moments, they hauled him back up, patting him on the back as if falling had been part of the fun. "Why do they laugh?" Phalis asked Bennett quietly. "Shouldn't failure be punished?" Bennett glanced at him, considering the question. "Failure is part of learning," she replied. "If we punish every mistake, people stop taking risks. And sometimes, taking risks is what keeps us alive." Her words lingered in Phalis's mind long after the exercise ended. Risk-taking wasn't something Zorgians valued. Their culture prized precision above all else. But here, among these humans, imperfection seemed celebrated rather than scorned. Later, during lunch, the cadets sat with some of the soldiers, including Miller and Dawson. The humans ate quickly, their conversations lively and animated. Zinera listened intently as Dawson talked about her life before joining the military. "I wanted to be an artist," she admitted, her voice softening. "But I also wanted to serve my country. Maybe someday I'll find a way to do both." Zinera stared at her, surprised. On Zorvia, individuals chose one path and stuck to it without deviation. The idea of balancing multiple dreams seemed chaotic. And yet, Dawson spoke of it with such hope. For the first time, Zinera wondered if structure alone truly led to fulfillment. After lunch, Major Daniel Hayes invited the cadets to watch a demonstration of advanced combat tactics. A squad performed a mock hostage rescue, moving silently through a simulated urban environment. The precision of their movements impressed even Torkin, who had initially dismissed human abilities. But what struck him most was the trust they placed in one another. Each soldier knew exactly where their teammates would be, relying on shared instincts honed through countless hours of practice. By the end of the day, the cadets gathered in their quarters once again. Phalis broke the silence first. "These humans, they are strange," he said. "They joke, they dream, they fail, and somehow, they still succeed." "They don't see failure as final," Zinera added thoughtfully. "It's just another step." Torkin nodded slowly. "And maybe that's why they keep fighting. Not because they have to, but because they believe they can win, even when things go wrong." For a moment, none of them spoke. They realized that understanding humanity wouldn't come easily. But perhaps that was the point. These contradictions, their fragility and strength, their emotions and logic, were what made humans so compelling. And as the cadets drifted off to sleep, they couldn't help but feel curious about what tomorrow might reveal. The third day began with an unexpected invitation. Major Daniel Hayes approached the cadets during breakfast and handed them each a small device that looked like a pair of goggles. "Today," he said, "you'll experience one of humanity's greatest tools for learning: simulation technology. We're going to show you a battle from our history, a real one. His tone was serious, but there was a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Zinara, Torkin, and Phallus exchanged curious glances as they followed Hayes to a large room filled with advanced equipment. Captain Laura Bennett stood nearby, ready to guide them through the process. "This isn't just about seeing the battle," she explained. "It's about understanding why it happened and what we learned from it." The cadets put on the goggles, and suddenly they were no longer in the military base. They found themselves standing on a vast field under a cloudy sky. Around them, soldiers dressed in old-fashioned uniforms marched in organized lines. Cannons thundered in the distance, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. It was the Battle of Gettysburg, a conflict from Earth's 19th century. At first, Zinara felt disoriented. The chaos of war surrounded her, shouts, gunfire, and the sound of cannons shaking the ground. But as she focused, she noticed patterns. The soldiers moved with purpose, following orders even when things went wrong. She turned to see Torkin watching intently as a group of officers huddled together, pointing at maps and debating strategies. Their decisions seemed slow compared to Zorgian efficiency, yet they adapted quickly when plans fell apart. Phallus stood near a line of soldiers preparing for an attack. He watched as one man knelt beside another who had been injured. Instead of leaving him behind, the uninjured soldier dragged his comrade to safety before rejoining the fight. Phallus frowned. Such actions seemed illogical. Why risk your life for someone else? On Zorvia, every warrior fought for themselves, ensuring survival above all else. Yet here, these humans acted as if protecting others was more important than their own lives. As the simulation progressed, Major Hayes narrated key moments of the battle. He explained how poor communication and overconfidence had led to mistakes, costing many lives. But he also highlighted acts of bravery and leadership that turned the tide. "War is not just about winning or losing," Hayes said. "It's about learning from failure and finding ways to prevent it in the future." When the simulation ended, the cadets removed their goggles and returned to the present. Zinara spoke first, her voice thoughtful. "You study your past battles, not just to honor those who died, but to avoid repeating their mistakes." Hayes nodded. "Exactly. History teaches us what works and what doesn't. Without it, we keep making the same errors." Torkin leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But isn't that inefficient? Shouldn't you focus only on perfect strategies?" Captain Bennett chuckled softly. "Perfection doesn't exist in war or in life. What matters is improvement. Every mistake is a chance to grow stronger." Phallus remained quiet, processing everything he had seen. The idea of valuing imperfection still puzzled him, but he couldn't deny its power. Humans didn't strive for perfection, they strived for progress, and somehow that made them resilient. Later that afternoon, the cadets joined the soldiers for a discussion session. Corporal Jake Miller and Private Emily Dawson shared stories of modern conflicts, emphasizing teamwork and adaptability. "No plan survives contact with the enemy," Miller joked. "So you gotta think fast and trust your team." Dawson added, "And sometimes the best strategy is knowing when to retreat. There's no shame in regrouping. It's smarter than charging ahead blindly." The cadets listened carefully, realizing how much humanity valued flexibility. On Zorvia, rigid adherence to plans was considered essential. Here, however, humans embraced change, using creativity and instinct to overcome challenges. By evening, the cadets gathered in their quarters once again. Zinara broke the silence. "They are different from us in so many ways," she said, "but maybe that's why they survive. They don't give up, even when things go wrong." Torkin nodded, "And they learn from their failures instead of hiding from them." Phallus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I still don't fully understand them. But I think maybe that's okay. Maybe understanding isn't always about answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions." The room fell quiet as the cadets reflected on the day's lessons. Humanity was proving to be far more complex and inspiring than they had ever imagined. On the fourth day, the cadets woke up to a different kind of energy in the air. The usual routines of the military base seemed quieter, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Captain Laura Bennett greeted them early, her expression serious but calm. "Today," she said, "you'll spend more time with individual soldiers. It's important for you to see how personal connections shape their approach to teamwork and leadership." Zinara, Torkin, and Phallus followed her to a small briefing room, where Corporal Jake Miller and Private Emily Dawson were waiting. The two soldiers had been assigned to mentor the cadets for the day. Dawson smiled warmly as she handed each of them a notebook. "Write down anything interesting you notice," she suggested. "It helps you remember details." The group started with a patrol exercise around the base perimeter. Zinara walked beside Dawson, listening as the young soldier talked about her life before joining the military. "I grew up in a small town," Dawson explained. "Art was my escape. Painting, drawing. It let me express things I couldn't say out loud." She paused, glancing at Zinara. "But when I joined the army, I realized that protecting others is another way to create something meaningful." Zinara nodded slowly, trying to understand. On Zorvia, art and war were seen as opposites, one soft and emotional, the other hard and logical. Yet Dawson spoke of them as two sides of the same coin. "Do you miss painting?" Zinara asked. "Sometimes," Dawson admitted, "but being here gives me new inspiration. Every person I meet has a story worth telling." Nearby, Torkin struggled to keep up with Miller's rapid pace. The corporal moved quickly, pointing out potential threats or strategic advantages in the terrain. When Torkin stumbled over a rock, Miller stopped and offered a hand. "You all right?" he asked with a grin. "Don't worry, we won't leave you behind." Torkin muttered a quiet thanks, feeling embarrassed. Back on Zorvia, showing weakness was unacceptable. Here, however, Miller's reaction wasn't mocking, it was supportive. As they continued walking, Miller shared stories of his own struggles during training. "Everyone trips up sometimes," he said. "What matters is getting back up." Phallus stayed close to Captain Bennett, observing how she interacted with the soldiers. He noticed how she remembered small details, like asking one soldier about his injured leg or congratulating another on passing a fitness test. "Why do you care so much about them?" Phallus finally asked. Bennett looked at him, her gaze steady. "Because they're not just soldiers to me. They're people. If I don't show I care, why should they trust me?" Her words struck Phallus deeply. Trust wasn't something Zorgians emphasized. Loyalty was earned through results, not emotions. Yet here, among these humans, trust seemed built on mutual respect and genuine concern. Later that afternoon, the group gathered for a debriefing session. Dawson pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing scenes from their patrol. Zinara watched in fascination as simple lines turned into vivid images of trees, soldiers, and even herself. "You're very talented," she said quietly. Dawson laughed softly. "Thanks. Maybe someday I'll teach you how to draw." Torkin, meanwhile, tried to lighten the mood by attempting one of Miller's jokes. "Why did the alien go broke?" he asked awkwardly. Everyone stared at him, confused. "Oh, because he lost all his space change." Silence followed until Miller burst out laughing. "Not bad," he said, clapping Torkin on the back. "Stick with me, and you'll be a comedian in no time." By evening, the cadets returned to their quarters, exhausted but thoughtful. Zinara flipped through the pages of her notebook, filled with observations about human behavior. "They are so connected," she said, "to each other, to their pasts, to their dreams." Torkin nodded, "And they use those connections to make themselves stronger. Even their jokes have purpose, to ease tension, to build bonds." Phallus sat quietly, staring at the ceiling. "I think I'm starting to understand why humans fight the way they do. It's not just about strategy or survival. It's about protecting what matters most: their friends, their families, their future. For a while, none of them spoke. The realization weighed heavily on them. Humans weren't perfect. They made mistakes, argued, and sometimes acted selfishly. But their ability to care, to hope, and to stand together despite their flaws made them extraordinary. As the cadets drifted off to sleep, they couldn't help but wonder what else humanity might teach them, and what lessons they would carry back to their own world. The fifth day began with an announcement that made the cadets uneasy. Major Daniel Hayes called them to a meeting room early in the morning, his expression unusually serious. "Today," he said, "you'll take part in a live combat simulation. Each of you will lead a squad of human soldiers." He paused, letting his words sink in. "It's not just a test for them. It's a test for you too." Zinara, Torkin, and Phallus exchanged nervous glances. They had observed humans in training and studied their history, but leading actual soldiers felt like stepping into unknown territory. Captain Laura Bennett reassured them with a smile. "You've learned a lot already," she said. "Trust what you know, and trust your team." The simulation took place in a dense forest area designed to mimic real battlefield conditions. The goal was simple. Each squad had to capture a flag located deep within enemy territory. However, the challenge lay in navigating obstacles, avoiding ambushes, and coordinating attacks without clear communication. Zinara was assigned to lead a group of 6 soldiers, including Private Emily Dawson. As they gathered around her, Zinara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She hesitated, unsure how to begin. On Zorvia, orders were given quickly and followed without question. But here, she sensed the soldiers expected something more, perhaps guidance or even encouragement. "Let's move carefully," Zinara finally said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Stay close and watch for traps." The soldiers nodded, and they set off into the woods. At first, everything went smoothly. They moved quietly, covering ground efficiently. But when they reached a narrow bridge over a stream, Zinara froze. Should they cross it, risking exposure, or find another way? Her hesitation cost them valuable time. Dawson stepped forward, breaking the silence. "We can send 2 people to scout ahead," she suggested. "If it's safe, we follow." Zinara nodded, grateful for the input. 2 soldiers crossed the bridge cautiously while the rest waited in hiding. Just as they signaled the all clear, an enemy squad appeared from the trees, firing simulated rounds. Chaos erupted. Zinara shouted orders, but her voice wavered, and her squad struggled to respond effectively. By the time they regrouped, the enemy had captured their flag. Back at the base, Zinara sat alone in the debriefing room, replaying the events in her mind. Captain Bennett joined her, sitting beside her quietly. "You did well in some ways," Bennett said gently. "But leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about making decisions, even hard ones. Hesitation can be dangerous." Zinara sighed, feeling the sting of failure. "I thought I could rely on logic alone, but there's so much more to consider." Bennett placed a hand on her shoulder. "Failure is part of growth. You'll do better next time." Meanwhile, Torkin reflected on his own experience. His squad had performed better than Zinara's, managing to secure their objective before retreating safely. Yet he couldn't shake the memory of a moment when one of his soldiers stumbled during an ambush. Instead of continuing the mission, Torkin had stopped to help him up, a decision that slowed them down but saved the soldier from being eliminated in the simulation. Later, Corporal Jake Miller approached him with a grin. "Not bad for a rookie commander," he teased. "You got us through, even if you're still learning." Torkin smiled faintly. "I didn't want to leave anyone behind." Miller nodded approvingly. "That's what makes a good leader, not just skill, but heart." Phallus, however, faced the toughest challenge of all. His squad encountered heavy resistance early on, forcing them to retreat multiple times. Frustrated, Phallus tried to micromanage every move, barking commands that only confused his team further. When the exercise ended, his squad hadn't come close to capturing the flag. During the debriefing, Major Hayes addressed Phalis directly. "Leadership means trusting your team," he said firmly. "You can't control every detail. Sometimes, you have to let go and let them shine." Phalis looked down, absorbing the criticism. For the first time, he realized that perfection wasn't the goal. What mattered was working together, and sometimes that meant accepting imperfection. By the end of the day, the cadets gathered in their quarters, sharing their experiences. Zinara admitted her fear of making mistakes, while Torkin talked about the importance of balance between strategy and compassion. Phalis listened quietly, then spoke. "Maybe we don't need to have all the answers," he said. "Maybe we just need to keep trying." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The lessons of the day weighed heavily on their minds, but also filled them with determination. Humans weren't perfect, but they kept moving forward, no matter what. And perhaps, the cadets thought, that was the greatest lesson of all. On the sixth day, the cadets were given a rare opportunity to explore humanity's history beyond the battlefield. Major Daniel Hayes led them to a quiet room filled with screens and archives, explaining that understanding war required looking at both its causes and consequences. "War isn't just about fighting," he said. "It's shaped by greed, fear, hatred, and sometimes hope." Zinara, Torkin, and Phalis sat down in front of the screens as footage began to play. The images showed scenes of destruction, burning cities, fleeing families, and soldiers lying lifeless on blood-soaked fields. Torkin watched in horror as one clip depicted humans turning against their own kind over differences in beliefs or resources. "Why do they hurt each other like this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Captain Laura Bennett stood nearby, her expression somber. "Humans are capable of great cruelty," she admitted. "But they're also capable of rebuilding after such pain. That's what makes them unique." The cadets continued watching, their emotions shifting as the videos moved from devastation to recovery. One segment highlighted how communities came together after wars, rebuilding homes, schools, and hospitals. Another showed leaders signing peace treaties, promising to work toward unity instead of division. Zinara felt a flicker of admiration for these efforts, even as she struggled to reconcile them with the earlier scenes of violence. Phalis leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "If humans know war brings so much suffering, why do they keep starting new ones? Why not stop entirely?" Hayes sighed deeply before answering. "Because war is complicated. It's often born out of fear, fear of losing power, fear of others who seem different, fear of the unknown. But it's also born out of hope, the hope to protect loved ones, to secure freedom, or to create a better future." Torkin frowned, still troubled by what he had seen. "So you fight because you believe it will lead to something good, even when it causes so much harm?" "Yes," Bennett replied softly. "And no, war is never ideal. It's messy and painful. But sometimes it's the only way people feel they can stand up for what matters most." As the day wore on, the cadets were invited to discuss their thoughts with Corporal Jake Miller and Private Emily Dawson. Sitting around a table, the group shared their perspectives. Dawson spoke passionately about her belief in service. "I joined the military because I wanted to make a difference," she said. "Not because I love war, but because I want to protect those who can't protect themselves." Miller nodded in agreement. "War isn't glorious. It's ugly and hard. But if we don't step up, who will?" Zinara listened carefully, her mind racing. She thought about the balance between humanity's flaws and strengths, their capacity for destruction matched by their determination to heal. For the first time, she began to see war not as a simple act of aggression, but as a reflection of deeper struggles within human nature. Later that evening, the cadets returned to their quarters, still processing everything they had learned. Phalis broke the silence first. "They're contradictory," he said. "They destroy, but they rebuild. They hate, but they forgive. How do they live with all these opposites inside them?" Torkin shrugged. "Maybe that's what makes them human. They accept their imperfections and try to move forward anyway." Zinara nodded slowly. "And maybe Maybe that's why they inspire us. Because even when things seem hopeless, they keep trying to find a way out. For a while, none of them spoke. The weight of humanity's complexity rested heavily on their shoulders, but it also sparked a newfound respect. Humans weren't perfect. They made mistakes, suffered losses, and carried scars. Yet they refused to give up, always striving for something better. As the cadets prepared for bed, they realized their journey was far from over. Each day brought new questions, new challenges, and new insights. And though they still had much to learn, one thing was becoming clear. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't found in their victories on the battlefield. It was found in their resilience, their compassion, and their unyielding hope for a brighter tomorrow. On the seventh day, an unexpected event disrupted the routine at the military base. Midway through a training exercise, alarms blared loudly, and soldiers scrambled to their positions. Captain Laura Bennett rushed to the cadets, her face tense but focused. "There's been an attack on a nearby town," she explained quickly. "We're deploying troops to assist." The cadets exchanged uneasy glances. They had observed simulations and studied history. But this was real, a live mission with real danger. Zenara stepped forward hesitantly. "Can we help?" she asked. Bennett hesitated, then nodded. "You can join us, but only in non-combat roles. Stay close and follow orders." As they boarded the vehicles heading to the town, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. The cadets sat quietly, watching as the soldiers around them prepared weapons and reviewed plans. Corporal Jake Miller leaned over to Torkin and gave him a reassuring grin. "Don't worry, kid. We've got this." But even his confident tone couldn't mask the tension in the air. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Smoke rose from buildings, and frightened civilians huddled together, some crying, others shouting for help. Soldiers moved swiftly, organizing rescue efforts and securing the area. Zenara was assigned to assist a medic team, carrying supplies and helping tend to the injured. She watched as a young boy clung to his mother, both covered in dust but alive. The medic beside her worked quickly, stitching wounds and offering words of comfort. Zenara felt a lump form in her throat. These humans risked their lives not just for victory, but for strangers. Torkin found himself shadowing Private Emily Dawson as she helped evacuate families from a damaged building. When a child became trapped under debris, Dawson didn't hesitate. She signaled for backup, then crawled into the unstable structure herself. Moments later, she emerged, cradling the child in her arms. Torkin stared in awe, realizing that bravery wasn't just about facing enemies. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Phalis stayed near Captain Bennett, observing how she coordinated the operation. Soldiers reported to her constantly, and she made decisions with calm efficiency. At one point, a group of insurgents fired at their position, forcing everyone to take cover. Phalis ducked behind a wall, his heart pounding. Beside him, a soldier handed him a helmet. "Stay down," the man said firmly. Phalis obeyed, feeling both fear and admiration for the humans who faced danger without flinching. As the hours passed, the situation stabilized. Civilians were safely evacuated, and the remaining threats neutralized. The cadets regrouped with the soldiers, exhausted but deeply moved. Zenara approached Dawson, who was sitting on the ground, her uniform streaked with dirt. "Why did you risk your life like that?" Zenara asked softly. Dawson looked up, her eyes tired but steady. "Because someone had to. That's what we do. We step up when it matters most." Back at the base later that evening, the cadets gathered in their quarters, still processing the day's events. Torkin spoke first, his voice filled with emotion. "I thought I understood courage before today. But seeing you all act so selflessly, it's something else entirely." Zenara nodded. "They don't fight because they want to hurt others. They fight to save people, to give them a chance at life." Phalis remained quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I used to think emotions made humans weak, but today showed me they're actually your strength. Your compassion drives you to do incredible things." For a long time, none of them spoke. The reality of war, and humanity's response to it, had left a lasting impression. These beings weren't perfect. They argued, they faltered, and sometimes they failed. But when it mattered most, they stood together, driven by love, duty, and hope. As the cadets drifted off to sleep, they knew this experience would stay with them forever. Humanity wasn't defined by its flaws or its victories. It was defined by its resilience, its willingness to rise above adversity, and its unshakable belief in a better future. And perhaps, the cadets thought, that was the true essence of what it meant to be human. The 8th day started quietly, but the weight of the previous mission lingered heavily on everyone's minds. The cadets had witnessed firsthand the chaos and courage that came with real-world conflict, and it left them restless. Captain Laura Bennett noticed their somber mood during breakfast and decided to address it. "War is hard," she said gently, "but it's also a teacher. What did you learn yesterday?" Zinera looked down at her plate, replaying the images of frightened civilians and soldiers risking their lives. "I learned that humans fight not just for themselves, but for others," she said softly. "Even when it's dangerous, they step forward." Bennett nodded. "That's part of being human. We're wired to care for one another. But caring doesn't mean we're blind to our own flaws. War shows both the best and worst of us." Torkin leaned back in his chair, frowning. "It's confusing. Humans are capable of so much good, but also so much harm. How do you live with that contradiction?" Corporal Jake Miller chimed in, his tone thoughtful. "You don't ignore it. You acknowledge it and try to be better. Every act of kindness, every effort to protect someone. That's how we push back against the darkness." Phalis stayed silent, still wrestling with his own thoughts. On Zorvia, emotions were seen as distractions, weaknesses that clouded judgment. Yet here, among these humans, feelings seemed to fuel their actions. Compassion drove them to save lives, anger pushed them to stand up for justice, and fear motivated them to prepare for the unknown. It was messy, unpredictable, and utterly fascinating. Later that morning, Major Daniel Hayes invited the cadets to join him in reviewing the mission from the previous day. In a small briefing room, they watched footage captured by drones and body cameras. The recording showed moments of heroism, a soldier shielding a child from falling debris, a medic running into gunfire to reach an injured civilian, but also mistakes. One squad had miscommunicated, leading to a delay in evacuating a group of trapped families. Another had advanced too quickly, putting themselves in unnecessary danger. Hayes paused the footage and turned to the cadets. "What do you see here?" he asked. Zinera spoke first. "I see people trying their best under pressure. They make mistakes, but they keep going." "Exactly," Hayes said. "No one is perfect. What matters is how you respond when things go wrong. Do you give up, or do you adapt and improve?" Phalis raised a hand hesitantly. "On my planet, failure is punished severely. Here, it seems like you use it to grow stronger. Why?" Hayes smiled faintly. "Because punishing failure only teaches fear. Learning from it teaches resilience. If we didn't embrace our mistakes, we'd never evolve." As the discussion continued, Torkin found himself reflecting on the bond between the soldiers. During the mission, he had seen them work seamlessly together, trusting each other without hesitation. "How do you build such strong connections?" he asked. Private Emily Dawson answered this time. "It takes time and honesty. You have to show who you really are, flaws and all. When people see your true self, they can trust you." By evening, the cadets gathered in their quarters once again, sharing their thoughts. Zinera admitted she admired humanity's ability to balance logic and emotion. "You think with your heads and feel with your hearts," she said. "It's chaotic, but it works." Torkin agreed. "And you turn your weaknesses into strengths. Fear becomes bravery, anger becomes determination, sadness becomes hope." Phalis sighed, rubbing his temples. I used to think humans were too emotional to be effective warriors. Now I realize those emotions are what make you extraordinary. They drive you to protect, to heal, to rebuild. For a while, none of them spoke. The realization settled over them like a warm blanket. Humanity wasn't defined by its perfection. It was defined by its persistence. These beings stumbled, fell, and made countless errors, yet they always rose again, driven by love, loyalty, and an unyielding belief in something greater than themselves. As the Cadets prepared for bed, they knew their journey was nearing its end, but the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. Humanity wasn't just a species. It was a story of struggle, survival, and hope. And perhaps, the Cadets thought, that story was worth telling to their own people.